Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Really exciting to be here and great to be back in Galway. It's such a beautiful part of the world. I'm not going to talk about the restaurant or my food. I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. I'm not going to be the best speaker here today either, so please bear with me. I'm just going to read this. I mean, some of these guys have been incredible. I'm going to talk about something really close to my heart and my roots. I left home at 16 years old to move to England to become a chef. I was obsessed by cooking and wanted to be the best that I could. I was prepared to put my all into it, and I did. On my first job as an apprentice, the chef couldn't believe how much knowledge I had for someone at such a young age. I didn't realize and even think about it until many, many years later. But it was because of my upbringing. Food and produce was a big part of my childhood. Every meal was cooked from scratch. And as children, one of our chores was to cook. We would pick seaweed, limpets, or seaweed as dulse as we know from here, limpets from the rocks, and my aunt grew the potatoes. We had whole animals butchered. We froze them down, and we used every last cut. My mum baked bread. We made our own buttermilk. We drank unpasteurized milk straight from the tank. I often woke up to the wonderful aroma of a slow-cooked stew that my mum had started cooking the night before. I grew up in a farming background in Northern Ireland. We farmed sheep, dairy, beef cattle. We produced grain, silage, and hay to feed the animals. My family worked and still do, albeit on a much smaller scale, 365 days a year, in all seasons from dawn till dusk, and during lambing season, all through the night as well. It was this that really made me appreciate food and respect produce. For the last 20 years, I have also been working from dawn till midnight and often into the small hours of the morning, all to produce the best quality food that I can. So here's the real point I want to make, probably the unromantic bit about how things have changed and are changing. Most of the changes are driven purely by money and large corporations. Mark Best touched upon this yesterday, which reinforces the importance of this debate. But thank you, Mark, for stealing my talk. Now, does it frustrate you when people complain about the cost of food in restaurants, or how on the news they continuously hype up the cheapest supermarkets and their profits like it's something to be proud of? Well, it does me. Now tell me, if you added up all the hours worked by farmers and chefs, do you think they would meet the guidelines for national minimum wage, or do you think that they would comply with fair trade guidelines within our own country? What is considered good value for money? Earlier on this year, the Prime Minister, David Cameron, said that he would rather take G7 leaders such as Barack Obama and Angela Merkel to Nando's than to our restaurant because it offers better value for money. Now, I thought this was a real slap in the face of gastronomy, considering also the hospitality industry was one of the only industries to grow during the recession in the UK. What an ignorant thing to say, but then it wouldn't be the first time a politician was talking nonsense. Now, the irony of the whole thing is that buy a portion of spicy chicken at Nando's in the UK and the cash flows straight into a network of accounting devices in Malta, the Isle of Man, Panama, Luxembourg, avoiding paying taxes in the UK. Yes, well done, Mr. Cameron. I'm not even going to go there on how the chickens are reared or about fast food chains and the obesity crisis. Good value for money, is it? I really don't think so. Now, don't get me wrong, we all love what we do, and it's ultimately our passion for producing food that drives us. But should it be exploited or taken for granted? We've already lost and will continue to lose so much more unless we open people's eyes to what's actually happening to our food supply. Both chefs and farmers are in short supply. We're told the only financially sustainable businesses are the mass-produced kind, meaning small farms that are the backbone of rural culture are the first to go out of business. This will mean only the large farms will survive and being forced to intensify and grow bigger, which will have further negative implications on the environment, animal welfare, and communities, and then most of all, our health. Supermarkets appear to be colluding with each other to drive prices down, forcing farmers out of business and putting whole communities at stake Then they claim they're doing this to benefit the consumer. The recent milk scandal brought this into the public's attention in a way that hadn't happened before. And there was a public outcry. Why did farmers get paid less than the production of milk? Why was a litre of milk cheaper in some supermarkets than a litre of water? The problem lies in a distorted economic system that promotes globalized, industrialized, commodity-style food. We live in an era of artificially cheap food, and the role of mass retailers and their failure to act responsibly cannot be underestimated. There are government guidelines set down by the production of food and rearing animals that all farmers have to adhere to, sometimes imposing ridiculous legislation. But I guess the public has to be protected. But how are they protected when cheaper produce is continuously imported from countries with none of these regulations? This seems ludicrous to me. Again, another scandal, the horse meat scandal, made supermarkets turn back to buying locally, pay higher prices for the meat until a few months later, until the heat was off of them, and they went back to their old ways. Many farming practices and use of hormones were banned in the UK and Ireland, and rightly so. But these practices are continued in many countries, and much worse, enabling them to have greater production, cheaper prices, undercutting our own farmers. And for our own rules and regulations, we end up eating food pumped full of all the things we banned. What's the sense in that? But there are no government guidelines on what happens to the minimum costs of food once it enters the supply chain of the supermarket. In addition, there are other guidelines set in place for national minimum wage, but the current pricing practices of the supermarket economy ensures that whole farming communities barely manage to attain that. The whole chain is broken. Prices are kept down by corrupt abattoirs and supermarkets, with farmers often making a loss. My brother now supplies animal feed to farmers. He often has farmers in tears because they cannot afford to pay for their animal feed. But what can he do? He's a farmer's son too. He can't let the animals starve, but also he has a family to feed. Consumers have their part to play too. Making choices based on price alone only jeopardizes the livelihood of people producing and rearing food, but it also jeopardizes the future of the quality of the food chain itself. Wouldn't it be better to look at supermarket shelves and know that a producer had been paid a fair day's wage for a fair day's work, and in the process, the food was produced in a sustainable way? Fair trade and sustainability are interlinked. It's about societies, the environment, the economy, health, coupled with animal welfare, decent working conditions, and fair wages. It's about making governments trade fairly and inspire shoppers to think about their purchases. We also really need to educate people on the variety of what they eat. We need to eat different things that are in season and look at waste. Just as an example, people turn their noses up at veal because of poor practices in the past. Recently, I was serving milk-fed veal in the restaurant, a beautiful product farmed by a farmer in the Lake District. We have to buy the whole animal to make it sustainable. It's expensive to produce. I was surprised by people's ignorance at eating baby cows. They had the opinion that we shouldn't eat veal, that it was cruel. I asked them if they drank milk. How do they think it was produced? Did they not realize that a lot of calves are just shot at birth? What a waste. One of our passions as chef is to help champion quality, smaller artisan producers that are produced sustainably. We pay a fair price for those ingredients. But time and time again during these talks, we go back to the importance of the farmer, the cost of quality produce, the cost of running our restaurants. These are very real issues. But chefs too need to be paid a fair price for their craft. The price of food on a plate in a restaurant as opposed to a supermarket shelf needs to be addressed as well. If you called out a plumber to fix a leaking pipe, they charge us for a call-out fee, petrol, parking, the parts used, every single minute they're in the building. Can you imagine if chefs worked like that? If we added up every cost, every hour worked, can you imagine how much food in a high-end restaurant would actually cost? We need to continue to raise awareness and open people's eyes on the mass scale. Cheap, or what seemed to be good value, more often than not means that somewhere along the line, or someone or something is being exploited, the chef, the farmer, the animal, or the environment. Let's look at the real cost of food, do something about it. This is the role of a modern chef. These are the things that we can use, our platform to help change. We can educate people. The future of food is so important, and it's not one person's view, but it is people like JP inviting us here to share our views that will determine the future and hopefully make it a better place. That's it. Thank you. Thank you.